oh, okay, most of this industry runs on Excel. And so it was a light bulb moment for us to say, well, there's a pretty meaningful problem to solve here.
All right, what's going on, everyone? How are we all doing today? It's Vincent Celeste here. Welcome to another episode of the Cash Flow Digest. You'll probably realize that I'm not Matt Faircloth. Matt is out working on some really exciting stuff that I know we're looking forward to telling you all about. So I'm taking over today. And again, I'm Vincent Celeste, the Director of Investor Relations, Sales Marketing at DeRosa Group. So really happy to be here. And we have a particularly, I think, exciting episode today. I think you're going to see very soon when I bring in our guest here why me, the investor relations manager, is particularly excited to interview our guest. He's a tech founder and CEO of a startup that we use every day. It's a program I couldn't live without in my role. And I'm very excited to bring this person in. So without any further ado, Kevin Heras of InvestNext. Kevin, good to see you. How you been?
Hey, Vinny, doing well. How are you doing?
Good. Happy Friday. And thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So Kevin, maybe to kick things off, could you give us a brief introduction of who you are, your origin story is, and a little bit about what you do today?
Yeah, sure thing. So as you mentioned, I'm a co-founder and CEO at InvestNext, an investor management platform specifically focused in real estate. And we think this is a very important space to be in. So it's everything from managing the initial part of actually raising capital all the way through the entire life cycle of your investment. So whether you're raising capital for a project or a fund, and then as well managing that capital downstream for the end-to-end solution. That's InvestNext in a nutshell. In terms of our origin, first and foremost, background myself, I always mention born and raised in Spain. That's always like a little bit of my personal tie. We'll always have that in my genes. Half my family is Spanish. Came to the US when I was a kid, studied at a small little engineering school called Michigan Tech in the northernmost part of the state of Michigan. College career was actually exposed to tech. Third year of college was part of the early team at Handshake. So Handshake nowadays, they're a career network student for recruiting college students right into the job market, and call them like unicorn status. It was an incredible experience there. So that's where the bug bit me to build something. Graduated, spent time in corporate, was anxious to say, okay, I want to build something. I'd say serendipitously met my now co-founder, Michael Giese, and I'll give some background on him because that's very much the genesis of InvestNext. Michael himself grew up pretty much in the real estate back office. His family ran a real estate investment trust at just informally being exposed to financial terms as a kid, like interning in the back office. He already understood how this stuff worked. He told himself he wasn't going to be a part of that business. He wanted to do something completely different. He wanted to be a software engineer. And so he went to University of Michigan, studied computer science, full circle. When he graduated, kind of had some gap time, said, okay, I'm either going to go work for one of the big tech companies or figure something out. And so it was around that time where he was approached by his family to say, hey, can you build us a simple system to manage our investors? It needs to do X, Y, and Z. And intellectually, he's like, okay, this is interesting. Yes, I can do this. Like just even as a software engineer, someone wants to solve problems. So as you can kind of gather, that's the pre-genesis of InvestNext. He built very much the initial concept. I already knew Michael at the time. And so I was kind of on the sidelines understanding what was happening. So rolled it out to this investor group, and pretty much it caught like wildfire, right? And it's like the insight of knowing that oh, okay, most of this industry runs on Excel. It's pretty disparate in terms of how people manage the entire capital life cycle. And so it was a light bulb moment for us to say, well, there's a pretty meaningful problem to solve here from an efficiency standpoint. There's more in terms of like what we're doing longer term, but that was like, call it the spark.
I definitely want to get into the vision of where you see private equity going and what the future of this sort of vertical, if you will, is. But I have to tell everyone first that you're being super modest, right, in the origin story here, because folks, in front of us, we have really a tech founder. He was very casually dropped in the word unicorn before, and that is very true. If you look at his previous ventures, employee number 2 at Handshake and everything like that. So I'm curious to know about your vision for InvestNext, but also the way you approach leadership and the way you approach company building, because I got to say, yesterday we were preparing for the episode and I was talking to Matt and I was like, tell me a little bit about Kevin. You've gotten to meet him more than I have. And the word savant wasn't thrown out there. We'll get into it. But before we do that, guys, let me summarize some things that I just want to highlight. InvestNext. Again, I work very closely with InvestNext, the program, every day. I couldn't do investor relations without it. And to describe for you really what it does for us is there are CRMs, right? When we use CRMs for our marketing and lead generation and really list building, but we couldn't manage our investors and distributions and capital raising without a program like InvestNext, which helps us raise capital. And then also when we're operating our business and we're making distributions, it's the software that allows us to trickle down. You might have 150 investors in one single deal, right? So it's a serious job of figuring out what investor 1 and what investor 78 and 150 get paid. It'll have to be paid differently and equitably, right? So InvestNext is really the brain of that whole side of the business and where I spend a lot of time. So with that, Kevin, I'd love to dive in a little bit. So, you are, I would say, maybe a serial entrepreneur here. What made you and your co-founder decide that what was the need that you saw? Like, what was it that was like, we need to create something here? You alluded to a little bit with the Excel spreadsheets and that sort of stuff. And I couldn't imagine doing this with Excel spreadsheets, but bring us back there. What caused you to kind of take this venture on?
Yeah, this probably goes with any initial inception on starting a venture, whether it is in tech or any sector, right? And I think our initial entry point starts with something very direct and practical. It's to say that, okay, there's just things are operating very inefficiently, right? To the extent that, like you said, like things are kind of broken across Excel sheets, et cetera, right? So you can say, okay, well, that's a pretty direct problem we can solve. We can build software, we can automate these things and abstract away a lot of these problems and create automation around that. So like that's where things started for us, is we were just focused on, okay, how do we reduce these problems and how do we make the lives easier of our customers? So as we got into the broader scope, as we started to grow the customer base, started to see broader patterns. And the patterns being that for us, it's really the accessibility into this ecosystem, into this space. You think about real estate as, you can call it this, the $17 trillion capital market that most people don't have access to. Probably the biggest impact into our lives, yes, I mean, where you live, where you work, like your entire surrounding, right? There's something is financing in those projects, and decisions are made in terms of how things are being built around you. And so that was very interesting for us from the start, is saying, well, how do we get to a point where more people, more entities can have access to this space? So our entry point was saying, well, great, we can create greater efficiency for sponsors that are raising capital, to the effect that, where historically maybe you could raise $10 million. It's a lot more efficient to raise $10 million from 1 or 2 individuals or entities, or $10 million from 100. How can we create the same efficiency across both, right? The idea here is that, in effect, if we can create that efficiency and we can create a wider audience of people to be able to access these investments, then in effect, we're opening up access to this ecosystem. So that was pretty interesting from us. It's like, okay, we can solve this accessibility problem with technology. I'd say that was like the main driving point for us to really go in and address this as a pretty meaningful problem.
I see. Yeah, that's really smart, firstly, because it sounds like we identified that there is inefficiencies for the operator, the pain of the Excel spreadsheets. Again, I was lucky enough to join DeRosa Group when InvestNext was already integrated, and I couldn't imagine what it was like beforehand. I honestly don't know like how that's even possible. But you identified that these operators are probably, their hair's on fire handling all these Excel spreadsheets, but at the same time, making the onboarding process and making investing easier will also be able to increase operators' businesses and make these types of investments more accessible. I would say that's working, by the way, because I could tell you the system and process you guys have, it allows the operator to educate investors very effectively. Actually, so effectively that I was telling a story to Matt today that, we had $200,000 investor come in and I didn't actually realize it. Like, I didn't know, right? Until the money landed in our account. Of course, you're notified. But it made the onboarding process so accessible and easy for that person that the conversation was very, very limited, and it just kind of came in because of the one sales call we had.
Yeah, you're touching on probably one of the most important points on this, right? Which is, at the end of the day, the ability to go from a relationship with an investor to them participating in an offering, in a deal. I think probably the biggest key element here is trust, right? So you're creating a pretty high degree of trust with that investor. They're certainly investing a significant amount of capital. And so part of all of this is, how do you create that when you're interacting with the DeRosa group or any group, like, you want to feel like we can trust this group, right? And there's clearly infrastructure that's going to support my investment, right? So there's that element. It's not just a systems thing, but it's also, for us, it's being able to create this stuff, it's opening up the ability for all sorts of sponsors previously that wouldn't have had this type of infrastructure to go out, raise capital, build their businesses around this, right? And so that to us is like really interesting. If we can really lock in that trust and that's one of the most important things. So
yeah, I need to say that too. That is definitely one of the main reasons we recommend InvestNext, especially to the people that we coach in our programs and the people that we're trying to help kind of do what we do, because it is a tiered pricing structure. It's a program that really can grow and scale with your company without being the bottleneck of your really operating expenses, so to speak. So I love what you're saying there. And we're talking a lot about the onboarding process. And that's been our experience too. I get to just have a conversation with an investor. And when they're interested, I say, go to DeRosaGroup.com/fund. And it takes them to our deal room. And then from there, they're nourished automatically. But of course, they have our contact information as well. And then at the back end of it, it's been a frictionless process. It builds that trust and it makes sure that people feel that we're operating with a certain level of professionalism. And that's kind of where I want to go with this, because one thing we haven't touched into yet is what the investor dashboard looks like for ongoing investments, right? Once you're brought in, you have access to really your dashboard, your portal, and it's where operators are able to communicate with investors with their monthly updates, their quarterly financials. We could see your distributions and track, right? I made an investment on X date, and here's where the investment, how it's performing. And by the way, one thing I always don't miss a chance to say is raising capital, I think, is even more of an investor relations task than it is a marketing task. Your repeat investors are going to want to invest with, they're going to be firstly the easiest folks to talk to, and as far as coming into another investment, but typically they'll also invest more than someone who's investing with you for the first time. So having this professional dashboard that over the life cycle of their previous time working with that investor, they felt nourished the whole time, that will really increase your likelihood of getting them to invest again in another opportunity. So it becomes a really clear business decision for us to do something like that. What do you think about all that? Was your approach to that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's to the extent that the standard for information for investors, it's being raised. When you invest in the public markets, you certainly expect the standard to say that, like, hey, where's my investment at any given moment, right? Like, and so there's infrastructure behind that too. At any point, I mean, pull up your Charles Schwab account, right? Like, okay,
right,
I can see what my performance is, right? And I think that's an analogy here of even this industry and this space, where that's where things are headed, right? Where investors in this space want to see that visibility, and that's creating a higher level of standard in terms of what people expect to see, which is a good thing. It's transparency, and again, it's back to that element of trust, right? Where people have the ability to invest in a space that, again, previously would have been treated more as like it's very closed group, but again, it's just a growing standard, right? The industry is growing to that extent. I guess all based on visibility.
That's happening in like real time. I've noticed that over the past year, and especially as economy change and all that stuff. But it makes it possible to do that sort of thing. And I've been answering a lot less investor questions because of how transparent the dashboard is. There's a lot of time you can answer your own question by saying, how many distributions have you guys made? What's the performance XYZ? It's all in there in that dashboard. So it really does limit, even though the communication's increasing, it actually has limited the oversight required to deliver that communication. So
yeah, it's interesting the way we look at it when you think about historically how call it investor reporting was done. There's always necessary level of expertise, right? Like, what are the things that I need to report on to investors to keep them up to speed on, again, the performance of our portfolio investments? And again, I kind of harken back to the fact that this back in the day was Excel sheets, and like behind that there's formulas that your team is putting together, which oftentimes that's a big risk because like there could be error in that. The point I'm kind of leading towards is the goal here, just in general, when we look at just being able to report to investors, the goal here is to try to abstract as much of that, call it like technical work in a sense, away from the sponsor, where the sponsor is focused on operating, knowing that they're operating within the system of record that can automatically push those updates right to the investors. And so
I see what you mean.
It's to the extent that, like, when you think about this is a weird analogy that maybe most people don't get, but maybe it's like relevant in tech in the sense that, like, back in the day when you started to build an application, like say, hey, I'm going to build an app, right? You had to think about, okay, I need to stand up some servers and I need to do all of this sort of infrastructure work, and then I can build software on top of that. Nowadays you have something like Amazon Web Services, which like just automatically you're able to. That's why people can build apps pretty instantly, right? They can just say, hey, I'm going to build an app, and I know that all the infrastructure, I don't have to think about like 90% of the actual work that goes into deploying applications. I guess for technical people, that's like the analogy of like, we think that we can build most of the systems that you don't necessarily have to track every single step, right? It's built out so the effect is, that once you have the system of record tracks the reporting and can distribute that reporting accurately. So I'd say like that's this, again, back to like the comment of having that's the standard that investors are expecting. And of course you trust in that standard to be able to deliver that too.
That's a great point. Yeah, because, and it goes back to the trust thing that you're talking about. An investor should feel comforted that this is an Excel spreadsheet calculating how much you're getting paid each quarter, each month. It's a, proven system that is third party and does this specifically. So in that, there's definitely a certain element of trust. I think our conversation wove into a little bit of something I kind of want to dive into with you, which is like the future of private equity. What do you see in the space and how it's growing? Because I really like what you said before about there's a certain standard that people in the stock, investing space expect. And I think that there's a certain, untapped market of folks that are expecting, the town hall meetings or the board of director meetings that are publicly recorded. And there's a certain subsect of investors that are used to that in a different segment of investing that may be more attracted to these type of private offerings once that level of communication gets kind of moves over to this space. So where do you see the future of private equity and the future of InvestNext really with this sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, you alluded to it, right? We think that the future of private capital, private investment, private equity, we think a lot of that starts to converge very similarly to what you see in the public markets, right? And so a big piece of that is having sort of this universal infrastructure behind that, right? That's a big mission for us is creating that infrastructure behind specifically the real estate capital market, and for investors to be exposed to the space. And again, I keep going back to the word trust, but very much it's being able to enter this space and place capital efficiently and knowing that can happen. So in like the short answer, I think we think that converges very similarly to how the public markets operate.
And so for InvestNext and InvestNext role and all that, could you speak to the market as we see it today? I've noticed investor sentiment changing and flowing. You have some really dynamic conversations with investors now these days as they're coming in. What do you see in the space in general? And, is there is the appetite for private offerings growing and growing as it becomes, as the stock market becomes less of it's never been just a purely stable thing, but I think there is a change in sentiment. I wonder if you could speak to that and what do you see in the market as when you speak to investors?
I mean, it's interesting. So we kind of get two lenses into the private markets. One is, we're a venture-backed startup, and we get exposed to kind of tech venture investing and kind of see that aspect of it. Very parallel to what we also see in real estate and how investors are thinking about this. But the space as we see it, right? Even just current macro climate, it's naturally there's sort of that cold feet feeling, right? Because increased interest rates, like what's happening at the broader scope of things. Kind of trust in being able to invest in this space. And so I think for us, the way, and like a lot of the sentiment we see is that, you had 2021, 2022, probably the best years in real estate ever. When you get introduced into that climate, and anything from there kind of has, that's the backdrop, right?
Yeah. Right. I gotcha.
So a lot of the sentiment we're seeing is that it's a good correction of like opportunity, right? For a lot of sponsors that are now really focused on the space and seeing there's going to be ebbs and flows in the space, right? But it's the sentiment is still a lot of interest into the space because the sentiment is like, even regardless of uncertainty, there's always opportunity in that uncertainty. So like the overall macro trend has not changed at all in terms of like public markets where investors are placing capital there versus call it the private market of real estate. The activity hasn't changed from that standpoint. It's all the more to the point that we make that a big piece of this is, again, you have a strong degree of trust with your network of investors, private capital. That's a big catalyst for being able to actually fund stuff and do projects even in this climate. So
right.
Yeah, that's like where we try to support on the sidelines of saying, okay, great, you have your infrastructure in place. As you're scaling, as you're raising capital, you have your systems in place to do that. But again, to the extent that the appetite hasn't shifted, right now it's just further putting a lens on the fact that there's new standards in investing in real estate, and we're a small part of supporting that.
That's awesome. Well, I want to shift the conversation to something I'm really excited to talk to you about. I really want to talk to you a little bit about leadership in your position as far as it comes to managing a team and putting the right people in the space because I'm thinking about what I might say in speaking to you. It really occurred to me that how hard it must be, right? Venture-backed startup, InvestNext was, and I don't know if we call it startup now. It's great. We should touch on how big the company has grown and everything like that. But we have to convince investors on the vision. We have to convince users like ourselves to join. We have to convince, and then I think what's probably the hardest, maybe, and very impressive to me, is convincing employees to join you in this vision. And so can you express that to me? I mean, what are your thoughts on leading your organization and scaling your team? And as folks listen to your response, I just hope that people listen for how this can apply in your real estate business as you scale a team, because this is a team sport. So go ahead.
Yeah, good question. It's certainly a journey, right? And I think that the route of being, call it an entrepreneur, starting something from the ground up, certainly there's like never, at least I haven't found to be like any like textbook approach to it. I think everyone has a very different experience in terms of like the things they need to do. And again, this is across any type of business, whether it's tech, whether it's real estate, etc. I mean, I'd say that probably the most impactful things that I've experienced in sort of my shoes, it's finding really great partners and founders. Again, people that you can have you have a good relationship with, have a good level of trust. You can have candid conversations about the direction of the company, and that's like the initial core. That's how InvestNext got started. Is we had a really strong core team between myself, Michael, and Matthew. So it's 3 founders, and that was, I mean, frankly, that was us for the best part of 2 years. We bootstrapped the company. We weren't going to raise a single dollar of outside capital until we had a proven business model that we could sustain. So that was like innately within our scope of saying we need to build something that can be proved out, and that downstream gave us a lot of leverage when we went out to raise capital. But to that extent, it's that's the team. I mean, that's a lot of it is finding a good initial set of what we call founders partners, and yeah, it's when you're building a company. For us, I mean, it's always been around being as practical as you can, right? Like we have a really audacious vision in terms of what we're trying to build in the future, but at the same time, we want to make sure that the things we're doing today are sustainable, right? From just even operating as a company where we're not reliant on outside capital, we can sustain ourselves indefinitely. So right. I guess that's more like the mentality aspect of building a company. And I think like one of the biggest things for us, more of like in team building, has been being really thoughtful about what each seat on the team is trying to fulfill. Day one, I mean, it's very simple, right? Like, we call it simple in the sense where like, okay, we have 3 product or 3 engineers between me and the co-founders. So like we're building something, customer base is growing, and then we're saying, okay, well, we need someone to really focus on delivering a great customer experience. So we're going to bring someone on that's like their focus, right? And so we had some very intentional pieces that they needed to fulfill there. Right. Of course, fast forward to now, over 40 people at the company. Now we're in a state where like, okay, the roles become a lot more specialized, but again, it's still very intentional in terms of who's joining the team, matching the culture, matching our working style. And so like that's always been a core tenet, just being very intentional, not just hiring presumably for headcount. There's this element. Well, first of all, I encourage everyone here to read No Rules. It's the Netflix sort of operating kind of like philosophy. You can take bits and pieces of these things and you can find value in them. But I think one of the biggest things that we've found as a culture, and it's something we kind of innately had from day one, but it was kind of unlocked when I read the book. We operate on this element of like freedom and responsibility as a company. So we entrust individuals on the team to really know their craft, right? And so as a leadership team, we can have a directive on saying, hey, we need to accomplish X, Y, and Z. And then a certain department will take that on, and we have the trust that they're going to execute to their abilities and knowing what they're going to do. So it's just kind of the complete opposite of thinking of not being a micromanager, very much empowering people to make decisions, probably better decisions than you would otherwise make in trying to control every single situation. So again, kind of like the FNR, freedom and responsibility, that's been a major element of our kind of team building is creating that talent density of individuals that can make independent, autonomous decisions within their function. So that's a lot, but just kind of giving you like a really broad sort of thought process there.
I know that so much probably goes into it, and it's more than just anything we could say here in a short time together. But I want to draw some parallels for some folks, because a lot of what you're saying just it struck me as so similar to really the philosophy that Matt and the partners at DeRosa Group have taken in operating our business. The way that really all this started with partnership and putting people in the right seats and really owning your swim lane. We call this the core 4: the brain, money, hunter, and hammer. Right. And we also make sure that you own your process, trust the process, and that, you really have autonomy, right, in those swim lanes. So that really gives you the person the trust and pride of ownership that I think it takes to excel in any sort of role. But I love what you were saying too. It sounds like there was a minimal viable product that was really bootstrapped and that sort of thing, because this was a conversation I was having with one of our students I was consulting with yesterday. And I was explaining to them, they have a vision of raising capital, but not for the next deal. The next deal is a joint venture. The next deal might be a joint venture and then raising capital. And I was expressing to them that, really that's a proof of concept, and we should be building your investor list now while you have stuff to talk about, and use this as a way to nourish investors and educate them on your process, so that when it comes time to raise capital, even if it's 2 years from now, you've been nourishing folks for 2 years based on your proven track record. So it sounds like you did the same thing with venture capital. You really worked on it until there's confidence now.
That's exactly it. I mean, and that's that's probably even again, whether it's in tech, whether it's our other customers, like probably the best outcomes we've seen is around exactly what you just said, right? Is it's building the core, call it your core business around that. So to the example you just gave, right? Even if it is you're doing joint ventures, right? You're creating sort of a portfolio of work, which creates your track record, right? And in the same hand, like you're already starting to build these relationships with potential investors, maybe not immediately, but they may be very active in the future, but they already know that it's down to the principle of the thing, which is the work you've put in and the experience you've gathered, right? And so that's what speaks at the end of the day. It's like when you go to an investor, they see that. And so it's kind of this similar analogy here. Like when you have something tactile that you've built, that in itself can speak a lot towards your track record and towards building trust. But
Right,
exactly.
and they're watching, right? So we have some great questions coming in, and I'd like to get to that. So we have a multifamily question I'll get to as soon as we let Kevin out, but let me bring this up here. So a Facebook user asks, Kevin, when do you know you need to expand versus wanting to expand, right? How do you expand your team and hiring? When did that all happen and how?
Yeah, that's a good question. I go back to us being very intentional on the seat and that we're trying to fill. So understanding a net new individual on the team, what is the contribution they're going to make? A lot of this for us is we're very focused on, call it like metrics, right? Understanding, hey, and again, I'll try to draw as best of an analogy here, but like in product for us, which I think there's a universal element here, but there's certain sort of call it like mathematical functions you can run here, right? To say like, look, we know we're gonna expand, X percentage over the next few months. We know we're going to grow at a certain rate, or we're going to take on certain opportunities. And so in order for us to do that, we have two options. We can either invest in, call it systems. And again, I think this any business can have this decision tree, right? You can invest in systems to help you streamline, automate as much as possible, or you can invest in people and headcount, right? So our philosophy has always been how do we systematize as much as we possibly can, and that's really just creating as much efficiency as we can with our systems and tools. And once we've sort of reached, again, you can always optimize, but at some point optimizing is just counterproductive. So you kind of have to find a balance of saying we can optimize with our systems, but at the same time we need subject matter expertise in a core area. So I know it's like a long-winded answer, but it is kind of a balancing point every time to decide the optimization you can do with systems versus the actual knowledge and expertise that you need on the team to do that. So again, for us, it's not the mathematical pieces of saying, okay, well, we know we're going to bring on 100 new customers in the next, month. And that means that, with our current efficiency, we need, 2 extra individuals to support those customers. But we know that we're also going to build more automation. So actually we need only one. So I guess long-winded, it's probably not. No, I think, but it's a balance there.
I'd love to connect that to real estate and how it applies, because we're an expanding company and growing team as well. And I really love what you're saying here. I hope people are picking up on that. What you're saying is when it makes sense to hire someone, when you can focus them on the result, right? When there's a result-driven role, right? And so you might be doing 2 jobs at first, and then it becomes more clear that there's someone required to achieve XYZ result. So here's a clear example. We had brought on a lot of help in our marketing side of stuff, and the result that they own is producing 3 long form videos, XYZ number of short form videos, which we couldn't do by ourselves, right? It was too hard. And so through really elevating our team and expanding the team, they were able to own this swim lane, and we put the complete trust, knowing that the folks in those roles are much better than anyone else in the company at doing that specific thing, but they're responsible for that result, right? So I think that's a great way to think about it, is, what result is that person going to be responsible for?
That's a great point there. And I mean, I'll say most broadly speaking, it's the incredible thing that we're witnessing in our world today is it's, 10 years ago, it maybe took 5 individuals to do something, right? And nowadays it takes maybe 1 or 2, right? So I know that's like a very broad thing, but just the broadest statement to be made here is technology enables us to do a lot more with a lot less in effect, right? And like we can get into the topic of like how AI and contributing into that, and how there's the statement that the next sort of $1 billion business will be probably built by one person with a lot of support from it, right? Like that's a thing. But just like the broader statement is like we have a lot of accessibility to the fact that we can do a lot more nowadays than
Yeah, I think you and
really.
I could tell we run the risk of falling down a huge rabbit hole right
Yeah.
now because I love that sort of stuff too. And I really think that people should take the mindset to answer this person's question on Facebook. People should take the mindset of you're either hiring now you can hire, systems, you can hire an AI, you can hire really a process, or you can hire a person. So, again, if you think about it of the result, who are you going to hire? Are you going to hire a system and an AI tool or program that exists to do that, be in charge of that result, or is it better to hire a person to be in charge of that result? And maybe they're aided by systems. So all I think great stuff here. That's definitely applicable to real estate. But Kevin, I want to be respectful of your time. I so appreciate you. And before I let you go, is InvestNext working on anything that you want to put out to the world? What's next for InvestNext? And where do you see things going from here?
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely working on a lot. I'd say the biggest thing we're constantly, I'll say like obsessed or very, very focused on is it's very much the investor experience, right? And creating a very streamlined experience for the investor. So we're working on a number of things that basically making the life of the investors a lot easier. And like, that's like the big headline around that. I know it sounds like very simplistic, but a lot of this is around giving them broader access across their portfolio, being able to even streamline the investing process a lot more. So anyways, like that's, I would say like, if you're thinking about like what InvestNext is in 2024, there's a lot of that focus for us is creating that experience for investors.
Awesome. Yeah. And you and the team are so good at rolling that stuff out quick. I just want to take a second to celebrate, the team you've been able to build because I know sometimes I'm the squeaky wheel actually. So I'll take a second to celebrate you all, but it's amazing how quickly you guys are able to roll out feedback and, the program does improve basically daily, weekly for sure, so yeah. It's amazing.
It wouldn't be possible without like DeRosa and all the customers, right? They're very vocal and like, that's the thing we live on. So I cannot be more appreciative of that.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Kevin. This is Kevin Heras from InvestNext, everyone. We love InvestNext. Threw in the link to find out more about InvestNext and why we love them so much. You can book a call with them there. But Kevin, I want to thank you again. Good to have you on. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinny. Really appreciate it.
So a lot of exciting stuff happening at DeRosa Group. We just came out from BPCon. You guys, I hope, saw a lot of exciting stuff out of that. And it's great to connect with everyone, although I'm sad I had to miss that one. But all great stuff. And, we are launching a new program. You can find out more about it at DeRosaGroup.com/accelerator. So thanks for everyone who connected with us at BPCon. There's a lot of excitement around, and it's been so great to see the reception around this program. It's all about giving you the systems and processes that we use every day in our, at DeRosa Group. We want to give you DeRosa Group. So head to this website, just learn a little bit more about it. We're happy to jump on a call and see if it's a good fit for you and your vision. And it's exciting to work with everyone. So with that, everyone, I hope you remember this live show every week. We're here in our Facebook community, DeRosa Insiders. We're live every Friday at noon. We're here to answer your questions, interview exciting guests, and talk about cool, current events. So thank you all for coming, and I hope you have a great week. Talk to you soon.
Hey guys, Matt Fairclough here. Thank you for listening again to the Cash Flow Digest. I really appreciate you guys doing that. If you guys want to hear more about what DeRosa Group has to offer, go to DeRosa Group, DeRosa Group.com, DeRosaGroup.com online. You can hear about all the great things that we offer from an educational standpoint and passive investment standpoint on our website. See you there. And if you guys want to join our online community, DeRosa Insiders on Facebook, where you can watch this program get recorded every Friday at noon Eastern, and you can come on as even a guest or ask questions on the show. We hope to see you guys on our online community, DeRosa Insiders. See you there.